slightly embarrassed to admit, like on the bus on the way home from work last night, I was crying, looking at all the tributes on Twitter, and there was a father talking to his young daughter about the death and everything. And it's been very, very moving. It's that sort of national outpouring of grief.
I've never been in the offices of the Daily Mail before, writing to deadline with tears pouring down my face and dropping onto my keyboard.
On the second anniversary of the death of Queen Elizabeth, we decided to compile a special episode of Palace Confidential, where we looked back at the shows we produced the week she died to hear the immediate reactions from our unrivalled group of royal experts. Before we get into it, a reminder to like and subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals channel for the very best royal videos. We'll start now by taking you back to Friday, 9th of September 2022, the day after Her Majesty died. Kate Mansi picks things up with her immediate thoughts.
She just had that sense of magic, you know, and majesty. And there's nobody comparable. She's met more world leaders than anybody else, has seen more parts of the world than anybody else, and had just welcomed in her 15th Prime Minister 2 days before she died, which is extraordinary. And again, you know, that very last public appearance, we saw that smile that we've just seen on all those wonderful images there, the twinkly eyes, and just that sense of presence and life and optimism that she was there doing her duty right to the end, and nothing was going to stop her from doing that. Absolutely extraordinary.
How do you feel, Richard? Yesterday you and I sort of helmed a very odd show where we didn't really know what was going on, and here we are 24 hours later. It's
been a hard couple of days, actually, to be honest. I mean, you know, because yesterday with all the health fears and then getting the announcement about 6 o'clock, I mean, slightly embarrassed to admit, like on the bus on the way home from work last night, I was crying, looking at all the tributes on Twitter, and there was a father talking to his young daughter about the death and everything. And it's been very, very moving. It's that sort of national outpouring of grief. And it's nice to be able to pay tribute in our own ways, and I hope we've been doing that in the paper, and everyone's working extremely hard to do that.
It's interesting because I think it does bring up a lot of emotion and grief for people that's possibly not related to the Queen when you think about your own family. But there was that quite powerful image of Harry, wasn't there, leaving Balmoral. And one has to wonder, many will be hoping that this is the event that brings that family back together. Do you think that's possible?
It would be nice to think that, for sort of sentimental reasons and the idea of a death bringing people together again. But I have to say, I'm sorry, I know it's not really the thing people want to hear, but I don't think it will happen. In the sense that, just look at it, you know, Harry travelled alone. Prince William went up to Scotland with his uncles Edward, Andrew, and with his aunt Sophie, whereas Harry made his way alone with his security guards. He stayed at Balmoral. He got there, sadly, too late to see his grandmother before she died. And he was there, apparently, for 12 hours, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Then he's straight out. I mean, did he actually, you know, even have breakfast with his brother? To be honest, I doubt it. And I think they are keeping him at arm's length. And who can blame them with the series of interviews they give and not knowing what's going to be repeated in interviews or on some new Netflix programme? You know, it's understandable, isn't it?
It's the dreadful timing we always feared, isn't it, Kate?
Yes, I think it is. But, you know, in the aftermath of the Queen's death, it's nice to kind of concentrate on, you know, the highlights and the good points. Like Richard, you know, would like to think that this could be a reunification of the family, that perhaps it is a point at which they can put aside their differences and forge a new way forward. But we were just talking before we came on air about our own recollections, and like you said before, it's very personal because it does remind people of their own grandmothers, their own mothers, and you know, this is somebody who looms large. I'm sure everybody at some stages had a dream about the Queen. It's very personal, and you know, she's part of our lives in a very real way. Yes, okay, many of us never met her, but that's not to say that she doesn't still loom large in our personal life. And I was just sharing with Richard before we came on an anecdote about having been very lucky to have met the Queen on a couple of occasions, and one was in the run-up to the Diamond Jubilee. And I said to her, you know, what do you say to the Queen? And I said, well, I've met with Lord Salisbury, and he's very excited about putting together the river pageant. Do you remember that wonderful kind of river pageant? The weather wasn't great, but it was a fantastic display of all the boats along the Thames. And she said, oh, yes, I know, he's getting quite worked up about it, and had a real giggle. And there was just this sense of kind of mischievousness about her. I mean, just warmth and such humour, and that's that always shone through. We may not have always known what the Queen thought about things politically, but we knew. I think we all had a really good sense of her personality and how much she cared.
Yeah.
Now, I understand. Let's think about what might be the next steps in the next few days. Kate, I understand we are expecting Charles to greet mourners from now.
Yeah, so today we're going to see King Charles III.
Isn't it weird? I mean,
which I had to take a pause then, because it's still strange to say it. But it will become normal and natural, and they've been planning this transition for a long time. So, as we know, in February, the Queen, on her accession day, said that it was her sincere wish that Camilla should be known as Queen Consort when the time comes. So these little kind of points along the way have been preparing us for this moment, but nothing truly prepares you, because it's still a shock, even though, yes, she was 96, yes, we know that she'd had mobility issues and had some ill health, but it's still strange when it happens. So we're going to see King Charles greeting mourners, having a look through some of the floral tributes, and then tomorrow will be the Saturday will be the accession day. I'm still confused because I keep thinking Palace is on a Thursday, but obviously it's Friday today.
It's a special one.
So tomorrow will be the accession day, when we'll have the kind of first big ceremony of Charles as king at St James's Palace. And I think that's going to be a real moment, and important that we see this in action, and everyone can kind of come to terms with the fact that we have a new monarch on the throne.
Isn't it? It's extraordinary. Richard, what do you think Charles... What will be the tone, do you think, that he'll be setting? Do you think he will see it from now as really needing to lead on the kind of monarchy that his will be?
Imagine having your big new job. You're starting that job at the same time as you're dealing with the loss of your mother. That's what a king faces, and it must be horrendous. You know, he will have, for many years, he will have thought about what will happen in these moments and what he'll do. But then going through with it will be a real challenge. And remember, the royal family were criticised so much after the death of Princess Diana, how they handled that and the various sort of missteps.
I think that was a much more extraordinary situation than the natural end of a life.
Because of the shock and the surprise and everything happening so suddenly. But it's similar in the sense that Charles will not want to put a foot wrong, and he'll want to show that he's, you know, sure-footed as a king. And it will be very interesting to watch him as he goes on.
What sort of other preparations do you think we'll start to see that have been put in place?
So tomorrow, by the end of tomorrow, we're going to have a better understanding of the next few days coming forward, so leading up to the funeral. We're going to have some details coming late tomorrow about how the coffin will travel down, lying in state, and that will all become clear. But it's a process over the next week. We're going to be seeing all the preparations for the funeral, which we expect to take place a week on Monday. That'll all be confirmed tomorrow. Yeah.
I can imagine, do you think that the palace, even though obviously they prep for these things for many years, that the fact that we saw a picture of the Queen this week, in the week that she also passed away, it must be a massive shock internally as well. It must be. I
think to those on the inside, they've known they were reaching the end, but the Queen's incredible kind of strength throughout, to the fact that we saw her 2 days before she died. It still comes as a shock, even though everyone knew it was coming, and I think it's hard to believe.
Yeah.
A source said to me today that those meetings that the Queen held on Tuesday were particularly remarkable because she was in an awful lot of pain, and people around her couldn't believe that she could go ahead with that, but she did, and put a smiling face, as we've seen from those pictures, her delight at meeting Liz Truss. And I'm sure the new Prime Minister will be very grateful for having had the chance to meet her.
Gosh, anyway, well, let's move on for a minute, because yesterday was an extraordinary day for so many, and the Daily Mail's royal editor, Rebecca English, has been telling us about reporting on the death of the Queen.
I mean, it was the most extraordinary working day of my career. I mean, I've never been in the offices of the Daily Mail before, writing to deadline with tears pouring down my face and dropping onto my keyboard. And you're very professional about these things, but, you know, the Queen is such a huge figure in all of our lives, and she's someone I've worked alongside for 17 years, following her engagements, writing about her, occasionally being lucky enough to get the chance to talk to her. So I think as journalists we felt like we've lost someone as well. I have to say, although the palace statement on Wednesday night was that she was advised to rest, she hadn't need to go to hospital, there was no need for alarm. We started getting the warning flags fairly early yesterday morning that her condition had seriously worsened and that the family were being called up to Balmoral to be with her. And I obviously hit the phone straight away, calling the palace, calling contacts, seeing what I could find out, just to be able to give us a head start on the story. And I knew when not a single member of the palace answered their phones that something was seriously amiss. It's little things like that in this business that are the giveaway. Eventually I did speak to a contact who confirmed to me that the situation was very grave. And I think about an hour and a half later the statement came out. I immediately, obviously, as journalists, you kick into let's just, you know, get this and do her proud, cover the story in the best way that we can. But obviously things were changing thick and fast during the day, so it was a very late night. But hopefully, say, the product speaks for itself today. And it was a really fast-moving situation yesterday. I mean, it was not until 10 to 7 in the morning that the Queen's flight, that burgundy liveried helicopter of hers, was scrambled from Windsor via Carlisle, where it refuelled, up to Dumfries House to pick up the Prince of Wales. He made it to Balmoral at 10:27 in the morning, so he was with his mother, fortunately, during the course of the morning and when she passed away, as was Princess Anne, who was already in Scotland undertaking engagements. The Duchess of Cornwall was at Birk Hall, so she joined her husband for support. But it shows you how quickly things, I think her condition had deteriorated overnight, that it wasn't till yesterday morning that they realised they needed to get the family there as quick as possible. But the royal household is a very well-oiled machine, so when they need to do these things quickly, they can. A flight was scrambled also to bring other members of the family, the Queen's remaining children, the Duke of York, the Earl of Wessex, and also her grandson, Prince William, up to Scotland, but sadly it didn't get there in time for them to see her before she died. But as someone said to me the other day, you know, they are despite all the trials and tribulations of the last few years, they are a very close family. And I feel that people I've spoken to have said to me that there was nothing left unsaid. And I think not all of us can say that when it comes to our families, but when they comes to their family, you know, the Queen knew how much she was loved and respected, and they'd had the conversations with her that they needed to have.
Rebecca English there. Kate, sometimes journalists aren't so fond of the public figures that they are paid to follow around, but it seems like everybody in the Royal Rota did have affection for the Queen.
Yeah, it's true. You know, we're journalists and we remain as objective, you know, as it's possible to be. And you do have a lot of time, you know, with these people, looking at them close quarters. But it's just hard, and I'm not just saying this because we're sitting here today remembering her life, but it's hard to think of anybody who had any bad word to say about her, and that includes staff as well. So people within the palace, you know, she commanded huge respect because she was so thoughtful, because she was kind, and because you could see at close quarters, just, we're talking about that last engagement, you know, and how much inner strength she must have had if she was in such pain to go through with it. But we saw that all the way through, you know, the strength that she had and that commitment to duty. It's pretty inspiring.
Do you feel sort of privileged, special, or just thrilled that you've had that sort of a memory with her? Do you have any pictures of her with you?
I feel really very, very privileged to have had that experience, and so few people will have done so. And she did, you know, when she walked into a room, you just, there's a sense of, a brilliant kind of sense of, you know, just being in the presence of somebody extremely special. And it sounds so silly to say it, but it was an atmosphere that completely changed when she walked into a room. And one of my favourite things to do actually on engagements was to look at her with her back towards you and just look as she was meeting people along the line and just see their little faces light up like light bulbs. And it was just incredible to see the effect that she had on people in a room. And not that long ago, a couple of years ago, I went to see her when she went to board HMS Queen Elizabeth, this brilliant kind of Royal Navy ship, and she came down with these fighter jets on this huge lift, and there was little Queen in this brilliant kind of red jacket and coat and hat amongst these fighter jets, and all the, you know, these big kind of roughy-tufty Royal Navy guys just kind of melted, you know, so pleased and so privileged that she'd come to witness some of the work that they were doing. And that's what I loved, that she had that effect on people. And it was just, and it was, you know, everybody, you know, every walk of life, she just...
I mean, Richard, talk about extreme duty and obligation. She even met diary editors like yourself.
on rare occasions. I mean, I think lots of people have a view of the Queen that they sort of imagine her to be very serious, very solemn, because she had obviously that side to her character and the duties she carried out. But she also did love a party. And one of her greatest friends and confidants was Lady Elizabeth Anson, who died not so long ago. She was her cousin who organised parties, and she organised lots for the Queen. And I remember going to one of them, and it happened, it was after the day the Queen had been to the Chelsea Flower Show. Now, we all presumed, this was only about 10 years ago, so the Queen was in her mid-80s.
Yeah.
We all presumed, no way would she come after walking around Chelsea Flower Show for quite a long time. But it got to about 7 o'clock or so, and she turned up. And this was a party at the Goring Hotel in just not far from Buckingham Palace. And she was talking to everyone, and she didn't seem to be doing it out of a sense of duty at all. She was really enjoying it, talking to everyone at this party, lighting up, as Kate said. But the funniest thing was, she didn't want to go home. I'd been at this party myself for ages and wanted to go home. I got a few stories. I couldn't leave before the Queen, can you imagine? So I was sort of hanging on until this party is pretty much over.
Like 5 in the morning.
Before we left. But that was in her mid-80s. So, yeah, that was a real good sign to her character, I think.
You heard it here first.
That first show, we put out a photo tribute of Queen Elizabeth's life in pictures. Here they are.
Richard Kay, I'm going to start with you. Charles, back in action today. Services in Westminster this morning, and then he's off to Scotland this afternoon. Now, I know we've been saying for a long time he's been preparing for this role for his life, but this is really hitting the ground running.
It's a man in a hurry.
Yeah.
I mean, is it all partly because he knows his is going to be a short reign, so let's get all the protocol, everything that needs to be done out as fast as possible? Partly it's that.
That's cold.
No, it's partly that.
Yeah.
But it's also because he has been preparing for this role for so many years. And one of the things we learned about today was that he'd been preparing for his audiences with the Prime Minister, with previous Prime Ministers over the years. So, yeah, he's a man who's well prepared and ready for the task ahead.
It's a horrible thing, isn't it? Because obviously he's been grieving the death of his mother, but he must also be a bit excited about this. It's such a mixed bag of emotions.
It is a very strange sensation. On the one hand, we're all grieving the loss of Her Majesty the Queen, the whole nation, and indeed the Commonwealth. But also, there's an excitement about the fact that we've now got a king on the throne, and what is it all going to mean, and how the changes that are coming down the line.
I'm sure we'll be talking about that a lot this week. Richard Eden, the emphasis on Scotland as the start of the morning procession, that's significant, isn't it?
It really does seem appropriate. I met someone for lunch last week before we even knew that the Queen was ill, and he told me that the Queen wanted to die in Scotland. That's what she'd almost hoped that would happen, and she hoped that it would help sort of cement the union. You know, we knew about her intervention in the Scottish independence referendum. She felt very strongly about the union, and she felt that by being there and then her body laying in state at St Giles Cathedral, Edinburgh, it will all help act as a bond, really, that bonds us together in the United Kingdom.
It's fascinating. Charlotte, Princess Anne, not somebody who gets a lot of airtime on Palace Confidential, but she's certainly proven to have a significant role in all of this, hasn't she?
She should get more airtime. I think it sounds like the Queen actually asked for her to be the one that went down on the 6-hour trip from Balmoral to Edinburgh, and so she did that yesterday, and she's also going to go on the plane with the Queen's body back to London. So certainly she was a really key part of the Queen's life. They were immensely close. They both shared a love of horses, and I think Anne was by her side when the final moment came, and was actually staying in Balmoral at the time. And she's fab. I mean, she does so many commitments as well. She does so many meet and greets, and that's why she was in Scotland at the time of the death.
And I think it's fascinating as well. My image of Princess Anne is always one of real stoicism. And those pictures today, where you could just see the grief etched on her face, is fascinating.
She cuts it so deeply, which is such a lovely thing. And it was nice that Sophie comforted her. It's nice when you see that somebody that stoic actually showed a little chink of emotion. It shows that she really must be feeling very deeply the loss. Now,
I've been trying to politely wait an amount of time to discuss this, but the elephant in the room is this great surprise for royal watchers was on Saturday when the Cambridges and the Sussexes, the previous Fab Four, appeared together to greet well-wishers, to sort of and see the tributes to the Queen. Richard Kay, let's turn to the piece that you have written today in today's paper. It's fascinating. You write that if it was William who initiated this and not Charles, as was previously reported.
No, it was definitely not Charles. It was William's idea. Charles is a man who's got so much on his plate at this time, and the last thing he needs is a confrontation with his younger son yet again. But it was William's idea, and William reached out to Harry. Whether it was provoked by any other intelligence, we simply don't know. But the fact is, it was a generous and rather spontaneous gesture. And could this be the start of something big? Could this be the start of, you know, a reconciliation? We'll have to wait and see. I mean, they weren't overtly friendly with one another, but then the occasion hardly demanded it. I think Harry looked much more nervous than his brother at times, but the fact is the four of them were together side by side for a moment, and the crowd were delighted.
What on earth do you think would have been in that text exchange?
I think it was fairly brief. I think they'd probably been speaking, but it was on the lines of "let's do it," from what I hear, and simply sending details of the times and that they were going to swing by and get down there together.
Of course, we're waiting now with bated breath to see if Harry's supposed tell-all book goes ahead, and I think that's going to be the real line in the sand, whether or not there's a proper reconciliation, isn't it? Everything
hinges on that. I mean, the big issue around the whole relationship between Harry and the royals, but particularly between Harry and his brother, is this matter of trust. Can they trust him do they trust him anymore? I think trust has been in very short supply because of what's happened over the last 2 years, and the book could absolutely blow up whatever green shoots are pushing through if he goes ahead with it. The difficulty for Harry is, I mean, how committed is he to the book? What kind of contract has he got? Could he get out of it? All these questions, we simply don't know the answers yet.
Gosh. Richard Eden, the effect of this get-together, though, had a slightly unfortunate effect for the King media-wise, didn't it?
It really did. I mean, remember on Saturday we had the proclamation of Prince Charles as King Charles III, and it was an amazing ceremony at St James's Palace, something we've never seen televised in the whole of British history. And there was all the colour, the heraldry, but that was pushed off the front pages when William invited his brother to join him and this reunion. And from what I hear, it hasn't gone down that well, because it's meant that this historic moment has not been recorded in the way that Prince Charles and his allies would expect. Do
you think that William and Harry foresaw that consequence? And this is, presumably, Charlotte, this is going to be something that the King struggles with, sort of like this sharing the limelight with the glamorous Prince sons.
Yeah, it could keep happening. I have to say, at the Mail on Sunday on Saturday, it was, literally, I'm afraid we took Prince Charles off the front page, and this could keep happening. But there is one thing, it could be a stroke of genius, because now we've seen the first Fab Four image for a long time, it might dampen the effect on the funeral day. So maybe they had the foresight to realise, let's not overshadow the Queen's actual funeral day next Monday. So we've seen that image, at least once now. That's giving them the benefit of the doubt, but maybe they foresaw that.
I think there's something in that, and it reminds me of what happened during the Platinum Jubilee only, 3 or 4 months ago, and the entire week was dominated by speculation about Harry and Meghan, to the exclusion almost of everything else, and so they won't want a repeat of that again.
So in a way, Charles took one for the team. He missed his big moment wasn't on the front page, but
I have to say it is something he has come used to over his long years as Prince of Wales, first with his ex-wife, upstaging him on so many occasions, and in recent years, his children.
And
so
he's very sensitive about it, isn't he? It does actually matter to him.
It matters to him because he felt, as the heir to the throne and now as the king, the limelight should shine on him.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because when at the time of his life, when he was a small boy, being told one day this will be yours, it was such a different world. So he's had to have a bit of a mindset adjustment.
Celebrity culture is very, very recent, really.
But Richard Kay, do you think, you were saying at the end of your piece that Charles's views to the princess was, look, just for goodness sake, sort this out?
It very much so. I mean, William is now Prince of Wales. He's the heir to the throne. He has got to take some responsibility. Don't forget that in all the negotiations that went on with Harry over the previous 2 years, they were predominantly led by Prince Charles as Prince of Wales. Now William's in that position. It's up to William, and because he has a unique interest, because it's his brother, he surely should be the one to take responsibility.
So you think Charles will just extricate himself from the whole possibility of sorting it out?
I think he will. I mean, Charles did not have such a bad relationship, as we understand it, with Meghan, as perhaps has been suggested that William and Kate do. So Charles has there is an incentive, if you like, for William to try and resolve this. I mean, there's no guarantee it will be resolved.
I can't remember. Was there anything like this kind of sibling distress between Charles, Andrew, Edward and Eva?
Well, Charles and Andrew don't get on like a house on fire,
right.
Let's face it.
Well, not recently. Yeah.
No, but even a while ago, I think Charles was instrumental in removing the security detail from Prince Andrew, or from his daughters, rather. Yeah. So there's been tensions between them, but nothing like this scale, I'd say.
It's just more exciting than Dallas.
I do remember once Charles made a very pertinent observation about his brother. He said the trouble with Andrew is that he wants to be me. And that sort of goes to the heart of it. Andrew, don't forget, was for many years the heir in line after Charles. And then when Charles got married and had children, and he got pushed further and further down the line of succession.
And same with Harry. Harry's actually said, hasn't he, the problem is now that my brother's got children, I've been pushed down. He's actually sort of mentioned that himself.
Oh, it must be so hard to be the spare. Richard Eden, I don't suspect you have an optimistic view of the hopes for reconciliation.
Well, I think William's gesture was magnanimous and it was very kind, but I'm afraid I fear it was a mistake. Because when they've made kind gestures before towards Harry and Meghan, they've been thrown back in their face. I mean, look at how Duchess of Cambridge, as she then was, went round after there'd been a row over these flower girls at the wedding with Meghan. She took some flowers, and then that was held against her. That was publicly used against her in the Oprah interview. You know, oh, she apologised to me and all that sort of thing. So it backfires. You know, we've seen the Queen and Prince Charles in his address sort of downgrading Harry and Meghan, you know, they're just people overseas kind of thing. But what we saw with William's gesture is it's elevated them, it's made them central again now, you know, next to William and Catherine. And it's really, it's wonderful for them. I'm sure they'll be able to exploit it a lot in the future. But I do fear it's a mistake.
Oh, that's so cynical. Exploiting it for the future. What do you think, Charlotte? Do you think that they will reconcile?
Do I think they'll reconcile? Not really, to be honest. I want to be an optimist, but I thought it was so tense, their get-together. It just, they couldn't bring themselves to do a smile in each other's direction or anything. And there's always been this thing about William and Harry. They've been united in the fact that they have a unique situation where it's really hard to trust people around them. William's curated a group of a very small group of people he trusts, and one of them was Harry, and now he can't trust Harry. And the irony is Harry's such a distrusting person and can't bear details about his private life coming out, and yet here he is releasing this book. So I think until that book gets you know, put in the bin, I don't think there'll be a reconciliation.
Okay, so if the book does go ahead, what are we thinking? Christmas release?
Oh, before then. I mean,
Right.
it's next month or November. The manuscript is with the publishers, from what I understand, and I don't think, as Richard suggests, I'm not even sure that Prince Harry has the power to stop
Well,
it.
quite. The publishers will have their say, won't they?
Here's a gallery of the late Queen in her role as grandmother and great-grandmother.
Rebecca, we last heard from you the day following the Queen's passing. I imagine it's been non-stop for you since then?
It has, and actually I filmed that just before I was literally running down to Buckingham Palace to be with the new King and Queen, which still takes a little while getting used to.
Yes.
When they arrived back at Buckingham Palace, which was just, it was like spine tingling, because it was seeing history unfold and hearing people scream, "God bless the King," you know, God bless the new King, you're a good man, Charles. It was incredible scenes there.
And so what have you made of this outpouring of emotion? Because we've seen there's also a lot of grief out there as well, but a lot of sort of, you know, goodwill and love for the new King.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think we did expect a huge outpouring of grief for the Queen. You know, I'm sure you've discussed on the programme already, you know, she's the only monarch that most of us have ever known in our lives, and she's been a particularly exceptional one as well. And I think actually what's been sweet about that is the way that it's transcended generations. So you've seen older people kind of crying and mourning her, but you've seen little children kind of drop off Paddingtons and marmalade sandwiches, and you know, because they remember seeing her at her Jubilee in June. So there's been that. But I did a big piece about the new King in the paper yesterday. Sorry, it's all rolls into one at the moment.
We don't know what day it is.
But yesterday about the kind of projection of Charles as grandfather of the nation. I think what's been really amazing is the warmth of the welcome. Now, of course, there will be some bounce effect because obviously people are mourning his mother. But I can tell you now from being down at that palace on Friday that there was genuine goodwill to this man. And actually, I don't think he's put a foot wrong the last few days. You know, he's been out there meeting and greeting people as much as he can. I think his address on Friday was just pitch perfect, you know, and you got a sense of his real deep mourning for his mother, as well as the kind of genuine passion that he actually wants to do her proud and wants to continue this sense of duty that she's got and become a kind of grandfather to the nation. So I think it's been a remarkable few days. It's been a real privilege actually to have a ringside seat on that, I have to say.
It is, you know, it's watching, it's being part of history.
It is.
It's incredible. Richard, we've also seen some very moving pictures from Scotland over the last 24 hours, haven't we?
Yes, we have. I mean, it's really been quite a spectacle to see the people queuing up, to see the Queen's coffin lying at rest in St Giles's Cathedral. And, you know, all ages. You've seen people pretty infirm, actually. You've seen people in wheelchairs, people but queuing up for hours and coming from all over Scotland to do that and taking that opportunity before the coffin comes to London and then will lie in state. And I think it's been, I'm sure the people of Scotland have been delighted to have had that opportunity first, and I think it has been very symbolic.
I think it's what she would have wanted as well, actually, in truth. Scotland has such a special place in her heart, and I saw on the BBC this morning actually people interviewed that had travelled from London and Manchester to go to Scotland because they thought it would be their best chance of being able to pay their respects in a kind of with a slightly lesser crowd than they will be actually in the capital. And I think it's meant a lot to the family as well, that they felt that they could actually kind of grieve in one of the places that she loved best.
Yeah, I mean, that photograph, you know, the images of of King Charles.
We must say, we know we've had some of you comment on us slipping that up. It might take us a few days, but we will.
It does take
a while.
It does take a while.
It's been a long 70 years. So, you know,
But the images of the King standing, keeping vigil in front of the coffin at St Giles Cathedral is really poignant, I think.
Oh, I mean, I think I said it was actually a beautiful picture, but a really sad one as well. You know, seeing the kind of grief etched on his face, Princess Anne's face. Although, noticeably, I think that the angle from which the photograph was taken, you could see Anne, the King, and to a lesser extent the Earl of Wessex, but the Duke of York seemed to be tucked slightly around the back. I don't know whether that was deliberate or not. But
it's funny you raised the Duke of York, because I want to turn to a story you've written in today's paper about who gets to wear what at the Queen's funeral.
Yeah, it's been a big issue, and there's a reason why it's a big issue, because for the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral last year, we had a really good exclusive in the Mail that behind the scenes, Andrew really kicked up a fuss about him wanting to wear his Vice Admiral's uniform. He was actually made an honorary Vice Admiral by his mother for his 55th birthday, the kind of gifts that only the royal family can give each other. And he should have been promoted to Admiral for his 60th, but because of the Epstein scandal, that was put on hold. But he still is entitled to wear this uniform.
The Admiral uniform?
Vice Admiral's uniform, yeah. And he kicked up a stink. And as a result, actually a result of our story coming out, there were huge changes, and the Queen personally ruled that everyone had to wear mourning dress, so nobody could wear uniform.
Yeah.
So what's happened now is that obviously King Charles III has not wanted that to dominate the first few days of mourning their mother, and he's acted really decisively and has ruled that basically only working members of the royal family can wear uniforms, with one exception, that Andrew will be allowed to wear his Vice Admiral's uniform when they perform a similar vigil to we were discussing before at Westminster before the state funeral. And I've been told that was a personal decision by him. It's going to be a last chance for a son to mourn his mother, and that he feels he should be able to do it. And of course it would look a bit incongruous that every other member of the royal family is in uniform except Andrew is in a mourning outfit. But of course the flip side is it means, it just, you know, the whole Harry issue, it means that that looks into stark relief that he really is the only member of the family that we'll never see in uniform during this. So it's complex.
What do you make of the exception for Andrew then, Richard?
I mean, it is a strange, rather sad situation because, look, the two members of the royal family who saw active service was Prince Andrew, who was very brave during the Falklands conflict.
Yeah.
He flew decoy missions, which are some of the most dangerous missions of the war. And then Prince Harry, who had 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan. So both of them have the greatest right to wear uniform, but they gave that up. Unfortunately, you can't have it both ways. So it was the right decision by the King that they couldn't wear ceremonial uniform. I mean, Prince Harry will still be able to wear his medals with his mourning dress, the same as Andrew, but not his ceremonial uniform.
I have an idea. Just float this one out there.
Oh God, this is dangerous, Joe.
Andrew can dress as an admiral, but it has to be from the Admiral car insurance ad with the big sort of like hat and the crazy epaulets. And then I think he gets to be an admiral, and we get to sort of like still point him out as something slightly other than the rest of the royal family.
Well, there are some people, you know, not everyone's in favour of this stuff, so there are some people who view members of the royal family going round in this uniform when they feel some of them haven't earned it as being a bit like the Admiral car ad. So
I think it's a very spiffy look and very, very colourful.
I think they need to get you on board as an advisor.
Yeah,
pretty
I mean,
sharpish.
I'm being facetious, of course, but I mean, it does sound childish to people, though, doesn't it? This kind of like, I want to wear that. He wants to wear that. It's crazy.
Yeah, but it's part and parcel of the royal family.
Why do they take it so seriously?
Well, you know, don't forget, the Queen was, and the King is now, head of the armed forces. And, you know, people who risk their lives in the military do it for King and now, well, King and country. So it's important for the family to be able to respond and be proud and show of that. But I know what you mean. There are some people going to think, what's the fuss?
Yes, and I suppose maybe some people, just putting it out there, might think, well, it's not about you today, it's about we're burying the longest-serving Queen.
I mean, look, while I think the King made the right decision in banning Harry and Andrew from wearing their uniforms, I think it was a mistake that he's allowed Andrew to wear his for this vigil in front of the Queen's coffin at Westminster Hall. It doesn't seem right for Prince Harry to then be denied any opportunity. I can't see the logic behind it at all, I'm afraid, that exception.
Do you think it's incredible and very telling, actually? Obviously, there's a lot already on the plate for King Charles, but these are early boundary testers and early indications of the way he's going to rule that family and that firm.
Well, it shows the challenges he's going to face, and the Queen could be very decisive. She would take decisive action, and it will be interesting to see if King Charles is similarly decisive. You know, if Prince Andrew makes a fuss about something, will he stand up to him? Will he put his foot down? All these things, he's going to be, the whole relations with his other family members are going to be very interesting to watch over coming weeks and months.
You say they could be decisive, but actually both the Queen and our new King hate family confrontations, and that's been part of the problem over the years, is that, you know, the Queen didn't want to upset her children, particularly people like Andrew, so that's why I think they were so slow in making some of the decisions that they did, especially over his recent problems. And, you know, the then Prince of Wales and now King is the same, you know, hence some of the issues with Harry, because he just doesn't like personal confrontation and likes other people. You deal with it, you deal with it. He's going to have to now, but I think that's why, as you say, it's very interesting. He's just laid down this marker very quickly, and I think Andrew knows that he's no longer got his mother to run to.
But perhaps he has William to delegate to?
Well, I certainly know when it came to, and I think you probably would have discussed this yesterday, the big kind of walkabout we saw at the weekend with Harry and Meghan and William and Kate. That decision was 100% William's. He didn't even discuss it with his father. He just instinctively knew it was a very human gesture. And to try and have a show of unity at a time of enormous personal sadness, but also public sadness. So I think it shows that William is stepping up to the plate and will make some of these decisions on behalf of his father.
And let's be clear, this decision by the King about the uniforms is a big one. I mean, Prince Harry and Meghan's admirers are absolutely furious about it. You know, they think it's outrageous that, you know, their hero.
Are you thinking of any one particular admirer there, Richard?
I've seen lots and lots, but I think it's fair to say that when they return to California, we might be hearing more about this.
Oh my goodness. Well, yesterday we reflected on the sometimes unsung hero of the royal family, Princess Anne, and today, Rebecca, you've written about Sophie Wessex, who was also very important to the Queen.
She was. I mean, Sophie lost her own mother very sadly at the age of just 71. She died of stomach cancer, and she was always close with the Queen, but obviously she grew closer after she lost her own mother. I mean, to the extent that she used to call her Mama, and there was this kind of, they used to walk the dogs together, and there was a real shared love of military history, for example, and they would pore over the Royal Archives at Windsor together. And you know, the Queen's very fond of her children, Louise and James. And years ago, someone told me about how the Queen used to actually sit down with them when they were little and watch Mr. Tumble.
Yeah.
You know, she actually, I think, in a way, she was able to do with her grandchildren what she wasn't able to do with her own children, because she was, you know, a working mother at the kind of, you know, leading her country. Yeah. And I think we were really taken by the scenes that we saw with Sophie, kind of hunkered down amongst the flowers at Balmoral and red-eyed and, you know, willing to show the grief that she was feeling and kind of hugging her daughter afterwards. And I just wanted to kind of capture a flavour of that, because the Queen considered Sophie a really safe pair of hands. And I think she'll be an important part of this kind of new monarchy moving forwards, because what I'm told is she's become very close to Kate. And I think as Princess of Wales, Kate will come to rely on her quite a lot as a kind of, almost as a kind of number two, as a deputy.
It's a tag team.
And William definitely thinks that Edward and Sophie are a safe pair of hands. So, and obviously with the loss of Harry and Meghan, which they didn't expect, I think, you know, their star will shine even more.
Who do you think King Charles will come to rely upon in that similar vein?
I would love it if he did with Prince Edward and Sophie. I mean, you know, he had this very clear vision of his slimmed-down monarchy, which was going to be him, Camilla, and his sons and their wives and families. And now that just hasn't happened with Harry and Meghan. And so I think he will need support. And I think Sophie and Edward and their family, I'm sure, will be happy to offer it.
And Princess Anne, Princess Royal as well.
It's those figures are the ones, aren't they, that are sort of hard-working but unassuming and not necessarily chasing the limelight or chasing the need to have a voice and all of those sorts of things. So I think, do you think that that's what makes them kind of solid as a rock?
Well, I was just going to use the word solid. I think Edward and Sophie, you know, some people might not view them as the most exciting royals, but they have been, you know, solid and safe for, you know, the last 20 years. You know, they had a few teething difficulties to start off with. They were kind of, as I wrote in the paper, they were kind of the Harry and Meghan of their day, wanting to have careers. Sophie as PR, Edward in television production, and they both got their fingers burnt for different reasons. But they decided to, you know, close down their businesses and just focus on their real duties, show some humility, and have just focused on that and supporting the Queen ever since. And I think that's borne dividends for them. I mean, of course, people want to see the King and the Queen and the Prince and Princess of Wales, but you know, I don't think people should be dismissive of the importance that people like Sophie and Edward and, of course, Princess Anne will play in the years to come.
Now let's have a quick chat about my favourite subject in the whole wide world: dogs.
Shoes?
Dogs, shoes. Let's talk about dogs, and obviously there's you know, there's all these things that come up when anybody in a family passes away, but the Queen's dogs are being rehomed, and apparently they do have a new home.
Oh, they do. I mean, look, the Queen is an icon, but I think as part of her icon, I mean, you think, what do you think about the Queen? People will think hats, handbags and corgis, won't they? One day I'll tell you a funny story about me and the Queen corgis, but I don't know if it's quite the time. Remind me in a couple of weeks when I get through this.
Yeah.
So that was one of the first things I thought, is what's going to happen to the dogs, because you know, I'm the same as you, shoes and dogs. Maybe children somewhere in there, but And yeah, they've got a new home, and they're going to the Duke of York and his ex-wife Sarah. But
How the corgi's feeling about that?
There is method in the madness, because actually she was down to her last two corgis, Mick and Sandy, and they were actually given to her as a gift by the Duke of York. So it kind of makes sense for them, and he does love his dog. He's got Norfolk Terriers. He walks the dogs at Frogmore, which is where the Queen used to walk her dogs. So I think actually it will probably help them, because there'll be less of a change in routine. Obviously they're going to mourn their master. You know, animals are very intuitive like that. But at least they're going to be in familiar surroundings. So, you know, it's not quite as odd as it might seem.
I mean, it just shows, doesn't it, Richard? This, you know, this is a firm, and it's a vital state institution with all of the mechanics of that being looked at now. But it's also a family with those sort of little complications to deal with. What else do you think we might be having to consider over the next days and weeks?
I think there's lots of things like this. I mean, the Queen was very reluctant to have any dogs at all in her, you know, in her old age, and she only accepted them on the basis that they were from gifts from Fergie and Andrew, who would look after them if she couldn't. So it seems natural that they've gone back to them. We'll be finding out lots of these type of things, but it is a family. It's hard to remember that at times when you've got Prince Charles carrying out the whole business. This is the busiest week of his life, and that's a week that any of us would have a week off. You know, we'd be off work at the death of our mothers, and so, you know, I think all we can do is sort of support them in that.
What happens, do you think, to that vast sort of like archive of possessions? I'm thinking, you know, are we going to see in time a V&A collection of her clothes, or Jeremy, what do you think?
Well, I suppose those are her personal belongings.
Yeah.
So, you know, they'll go back to the family, and obviously we do see regular exhibitions at Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace and places like that of royal clothing. But I mean, that's part of our kind of nation's history. There's very few people in the world, you know, maybe people like Jackie O or Marilyn Monroe, that you can just show a piece of clothing and you'll instinctively know who that belonged to.
Yeah.
And I think the Queen is up there with that.
As Rebecca and I discussed there, the late Queen loved dogs. Here are some of our favourite images of her with some of her favourite hounds.
Okay, so let's kick things off with today's events. The Queen's body has been returned to Buckingham Palace, and shortly after we record this, senior members of the royal family will lead a procession to the palace from the palace to Westminster Hall. Another big set-piece event for the family, Charlotte.
A huge set-piece event, and we're going to see something extraordinary, which is William and Harry walking behind a coffin for the first time since Diana died in 1997, and I think it's going to really touch our hearts, to be honest. And I think it could be a really good way for the brothers to somehow connect again over the shared memory, and what a unique and strange thing it is to have to do.
But what a horribly haunting thing to have to do, because that still haunts me, that image of those young boys. What on earth is going to be going through their minds?
I think it's appropriate use of the word triggering, which I don't usually like, but it is. I think they're just going to be transported right back, and they'll know all eyes are on them. I think it's going to be, I mean, good luck to them. It's going to be a tough morning for them.
Richard, inevitably the body language of the royals in such an event will be scrutinised. What do you have any predictions on all of that?
Well, I mean, at least they're being seen in this way at a very solemn event. So they know they're not the centre of attention. It's the Queen and it's the coffin. So they will be very serious. And, you know, it's going to be so hard to maintain that. I think it's pretty much a 40-minute walk, very slow pace, spectators all along the way. You know, and we've seen even sort of protesters. There was one protester anyway in Edinburgh. So they're aware of what's going on around them and they have to be careful all the time. Yes, people will be watching for relations between William and Harry, and they'll be thinking back. But I think really it's the solemn nature of the occasion that will be the important thing.
What a mind game to have to play with yourself, though, when you know that everybody's going to be looking at that.
I think so.
They've got to look straight ahead and be really solemn, but also exchange friendly glances towards one another, I suppose, because we're going to be thinking, oh, they were cold with one another. But of course they have to be cold. It is a mind game. It's a total mind game.
Yeah, and there's been another spanner in the works with a statement that Prince Harry put out through his spokesman, you know, via Los Angeles yesterday.
Yes, shall I read that out for you now, actually? You mentioned that statement from Harry's spokesman. It says, Prince Harry will wear a mourning suit throughout events honouring his grandmother. His decade of military service is not determined by the uniform he wears, and we respectfully ask that focus remain on the life and legacy of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. So what do you make of that comment, Richard? I
mean, let's be clear, you know, this is another real dig at his family. You know, it really is. He could have, first of all...
Do you not think it's a dig at the media more for sort of like speculating about it all?
Well, first of all, he didn't need to say anything. He can just let actions speak louder than words and people will see what he wears. Secondly, if he wanted to put out a statement, he could have just said, I'll be wearing military uniform and I'd like the focus to be on my grandmother throughout. Instead, he inserted this highly provocative sentence, you know, I don't need to put on a uniform, which is saying, look, I did active service. I, you know, was in the military for 10 years, but look at the others. Look at Prince Edward, who dropped out while training as a Royal Marine. Look at the others who never did active service. So there's that. And also particularly at Prince Andrew, who has been given this exception, remember, that he is allowed to wear his uniform just for one of the 5 events. And he's really making a point, I think.
I have some sympathy for why Harry's a bit dark about Andrew being able to wear his uniform, though.
I totally agree. It's such an own goal of the royal family, because they've extended the olive branch with the walk around and the flowers. And now they seem to have retracted that olive branch, given him a reason to be snarky. Although I have to say, I don't think it is that snarky, this statement. I think it is quite respectful and calm, compared to, do you remember when he said service is universal?
Oh, yeah, that was from both of them, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that was quite a snarky one. I felt like this was actually less snarky.
Well, don't worry, I'm sure there'll be lots more statements to come once they get back to California.
And a whole tomb full of them, because we've also had news on the book today via something Alison Boshoff has written in the Mail. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this was interesting. I mean, she's just reporting what Meghan's recent biographer, Tom Bower, has been saying, and that's that he is told that there's no question the book is coming out. He said it will be published in November, so very soon, and he went as far as to name the publishers who are going to be producing the book in Britain. And that it's all going ahead.
I mean, surely contracts have been inked for some time.
I think it's too late to row back.
Yeah.
I think it's quite likely it's incredibly complimentary about the Queen, so there's that. But maybe a little bit less so about his father and brother.
Well, we did discuss this on the show on Monday, Charlotte, with Richard Kay, whether or not Harry's relationship with the family is at a point of reconciliation or truce. And if this book comes out, it's more likely to be stagnated at truce, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it is a truce. I think we'll get a little bit more of a sense of that today when we see them interacting with each other, whether this is a sort of truce or beginning of a new relationship. But yeah, unless he can stop the book. I mean, I did say on Monday, unless he can stop the book, they can't get on with him. They just won't be able to trust him.
I can't wait to see what happens there. But Richard, your Mail colleague Robert Hardman has called in today's paper for plans to be changed around Westminster so that more people can pay respects to Her Majesty?
Yes, I mean, lots of people were disappointed that the Queen's coffin was brought back from Edinburgh to London on a plane. It's something that's been arranged, but in the past, as with the Queen's father and others, they've come on the royal train. And what that did was it gave so many people a chance to see that train pass. I mean, I remember my own father has talked about his...
I thought you were going to tell me you were there. I was like, wow.
Yeah, my father's talked about his memory
yeah.
of seeing that royal train. Yeah. And it's something that's really stuck with people. So what Robert's called for today is for basically the route to be extended. So when they take the Queen on her final journey from the funeral to Windsor, that it should go on a longer route, so more people. I mean, my goodness, we saw, last night when the coffin was transported from RAF Northolt, even though it was down a really busy road, the A40, there were people wanted to line the route, and I'm sure they would. So it was just a simple call, if it's possible, to try and extend that route and give as many people a chance to see her pass as possible.
Do you think that anyone will listen to that advice? Do you think that
I think they will, but there's lots of practicalities. The reason they didn't use the royal train was they're very worried about potential protests, about health and safety with people falling down embankments, that sort of thing. So, no one wants a disaster, and there are millions of people who would like to pay their respects in some way.
They must have recognised from yesterday, seeing all those people lining up on the motorway, they must realise how much of an appetite there is for a longer route, or to follow Robert Hardman's suggestion, because, it's amazing seeing cars pull over on a motorway to look at the coffin.
But let's try and avoid disaster, please.
Yeah.
Lots more still to discuss, but let's take a look at today's montage. Each day this week, we've been putting together some galleries of some of our favourite images of the late Queen Elizabeth II, and today's theme is the life she spent with the late Duke of Edinburgh. Oh, some beautiful images there. Before we finish, I want to address another controversy, though, that has erupted behind palace walls, and the fact that up to 100 of staff at Clarence House were informed they could lose their jobs. The move comes as King Charles and Camilla, the Queen Consort, change roles. Richard, the timing of this has come in for some criticism.
Yes, it is. It is awful, and it's been seized on by the Guardian newspaper, which is a bit of a Republican newspaper, to cause trouble. I think the problem they had is inevitably staff will lose their jobs. They have a lot of staff, and there were 2 households, and now Prince Charles is King Charles. He moves away from Clarence House, and there will be some redundancies. And from what I'm told, they wanted to wait until obviously after the funeral, but they were advised that legally they had a legal obligation to tell people as soon as possible.
Right.
When your job's under threat, you've got to be told, according to the law in our country. So it's unfortunate, but it is one of those things.
They were trying to reassure the staff, I felt. I felt the statement was reassuring. It said, you know, we'll look after you, we'll do our utmost to make sure that you're OK and that you're redistributed.
Yeah, that's what I've been made redundant a couple of times. Everyone says that. It really means much.
No, I think they are trying to find jobs for as many people as they can.
Are.
But,
You
have to do that.
But remember, the Palace can't win, because papers like The Guardian otherwise will be saying, why do you have so many staff? You know, you're doubling up waste. It's all, you know, public money, that type of thing. So they are in a situation where they can't really win in some ways.
I would have thought it was the Queen's staff who had more to worry about. Do you know what I mean? Rather than King Charles would take his...
Yeah, you'd think you'd bring your own staff over.
Yeah.
I wonder whether if Harry and Meghan were still in the royal family, they would have seamlessly transitioned into being in charge of those staff, should they have had their own household, but of course they don't.
If there's room at Clarence House, I'll go. Do you think we might see shake-ups elsewhere, though, in the royal household?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, one funny area is Camilla's taking over the racing. In an unofficial capacity. I think all the horses and the racing operation actually officially goes to King Charles. But she has a lot of horses on her hand. They have to be redistributed.
Oh, don't make the horses redundant.
I know, I'm so upset about horses.
Yeah.
And, you know, and all those trainers and owners. And, you know, there might be a little area there where there's a bit of movement.
Gosh, I mean, do you think, Richard, that King Charles will have to think about how he makes these decisions in the future, or do you just think it was decisive and right and that's just the way it is?
Can you imagine how much he's got on his plate at the moment?
Well, I really can't, actually. It's extraordinary. And no matter how many years we've been waiting for this, all of a sudden...
We did get a bit of sense of that yesterday. There was a video which went viral of the King being slightly irritable with his pens again. For some reason, no one seems to be able to give him some pens that work.
No, but I do. I actually felt quite... I know everyone was laughing, but it just seemed like such a moment of displaced stress, and you can really understand that, I think.
Wasn't it fascinating watching Camilla swoop in, take the pen from him, soothe everything down, then sit down and sign? I mean, they've got a great dynamic there. She knows exactly when to calm him down.
And it was evident he'd forgotten what day it was, like most of us.
I didn't know if it was the 12th.
Well,
I bet. He probably hasn't slept.
Up.
Let's start with yesterday's occasion where the Queen's body was taken in an extraordinary procession from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall. Kate, I'm going to start with you. You were there in the hall. Can you begin to describe the atmosphere?
Yeah, I felt incredibly privileged to be one of the few journalists, along with Rebecca, actually in the hall when it was happening. So as you all saw on television, that marvellous procession coming down from Buckingham Palace, we were all there in situ. So we saw, obviously, the Queen Consort, Princess of Wales, Countess of Wessex and Duchess of Sussex, and they were standing, when they arrived in the car, they were standing there just at the entrance underneath this magnificent kind of stained glass window that was put in to commemorate the Diamond Jubilee. And as the procession got closer, obviously we couldn't see it in the hall, but we could just hear the bells tolling and the drums just getting closer and closer, and inside the hall was a complete silence. There was a moment of kind of levity when Mike Tyndall cleared his throat and Zara kind of shot him a look. But it was very intimate, actually. You know, it looks like it's a huge hall, but there's this magnificent kind of arched roof, but it was very intimate. Just the silence was profound. And when the coffin came in, it was one of those real moments of history that, as a journalist, you think, my goodness, I'm incredibly privileged to have witnessed, right?
You were there too, as Kate said, Rebecca, and you were standing quite close to the royal family. What sort of observations did you have from that?
Well, as Kate said, it was a privilege, and it almost felt like you were kind of in a moment of private family grieving, because there were, I don't know, maybe 300-400 people there, and a few peers and MPs, but the place was so big, they were like kind of specks in the distance. You could barely see them. So it effectively was just you and a few ceremonial staff and members of the royal family with Her Majesty the Queen's coffin. And I have to say, a lot of what we saw was actually off camera, because people weren't actually allowed to pick up their cameras and photograph until they saw the coffin. But we've probably had about 5 or 10 minutes of waiting and watching. And I mean, the body language was fascinating. I mean, Camilla, she's been very emotional throughout this whole thing, and she was, you know, head straight ahead, looking ahead of her, really trying to control herself. You know, likewise with Kate. I mean, Sophie Wessex, my heart went out to her. She looked
like she was in
bereft.
bits, didn't she? She really looked shattered.
Really upset, doesn't she?
Yeah. And as I wrote in the paper today, you know, as that noise that Kate described got closer, you kind of saw her peer through the entrance as if she really didn't want to believe that this was happening. You know, it was like, oh God, is this the beginning of the end? It's the moment we really have to say goodbye to her.
It's the dreadful thing about funerals, isn't it? It's that manifestation of, you know, you have to accept that it's happening.
And this was a point at which they kind of handed over from that private night that they'd had at Buckingham Palace, away from the cameras the night before, just as a family with the coffin, and basically handing the Queen back to the people.
Yeah.
And it just felt, it was incredibly emotional. And then, you know, Lady Louise, bless her, she's only young, was in tears. And
Beatrice usually dabbing their noses. And also one of the things that really moved me were the ladies in waiting, and I've done a piece about them in the paper today. Inspired, kind of weirdly, I found a letter I wrote to the Queen when I was...
I did see your tweet, yeah.
When I was 9. Saying I had a school project for our school centenary and had to go around and look at an interesting building, and I just wrote to the Queen saying, like any 9-year-old do, can I come and look around your house, please? Obviously not knowing that many years later, I would look around it quite a lot. And I got this amazing letter back, which I've still got with the envelope, from the lady in waiting, Mary Morrison, saying, thank you very much for your kind letter, because they respond to every letter personally. You know, the Queen commands me that, you know, you can't come and look at her house, unfortunately, but we'll suggest the places you can. And Mary Morrison was there yesterday. You know, you can put the maths together and work out how old I am from that, but it was well over 40 years ago.
How old she is.
Did you get a chance to speak to her later?
No, I mean, I would have liked her to say, look, I've still got it.
They were standing for a long time, because the whole thing was standing, wasn't it? And you have these 7 ladies in waiting, some of whom are of a great age, actually, themselves.
Yeah, well into their 80s.
Yeah.
And she and people like Lady Susan Hussey have been with the Queen for 60 years.
Isn't it amazing?
I mean, the ladies in waiting fascinate me. They're known as the head girls, and there is nothing that they don't know that goes on at that palace. You know, they are the Queen's eyes and ears.
And what's their
everything.
reputation? Are people frightened of them?
Well, if someone said to me, like, when I said to them about the ladies in waiting, they went, oh, I love the ladies in waiting. Like, they fascinate and they terrify me in equal measure, you know.
Will the King have men in waiting?
No, but Camilla will probably at some point have to have a lady in waiting, because they just practically need it, you know, for correspondence and picking up flowers. But I was really moved by seeing them there, these kind of ladies. And they, at one point, one of them needed a seat, but they stood there on their walking sticks. One of them was leaning on their umbrella, and they were just determined to stand there proud by the Queen that they served in life, as they're now going to do in death. And it was things like that that were just, I think, incredibly moving.
It is amazing. Now, through all of this, Meghan has kept a low profile. How did you think she fit into the proceedings yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, look, the body language was very interesting. I mean, you know, I didn't want to focus the piece I'd written on her today, because I think there's just so much more to what we're seeing. But you couldn't help but notice it, especially from where Kate and I were. We were so close to them, you know, right above them. It was a very good vantage point for a journalistic point of view. And you could see Camilla, Kate and Sophie were kind of together, and the body language was very comfortable between them. But then there was Meghan, and you know, you could have almost fitted somebody else in that space. It spoke volume. You know, even if you didn't know what we all know that's happened over the last few years, you would have turned up and thought, that looks a bit odd, there's something slightly wrong here. But then, to be fair, Sophie, who is known as quite a peacemaker in the family, turned and talked to her, and it kind of brought Meghan into the fold. And you know, she carried herself out with enormous dignity. But you know, someone whispered to me while I was there, God, that body language speaks volumes, and it did, I have to say.
Speaking of Meghan and Harry, Richard, I can't believe here we are, another on the eve of another royal funeral, and it's Harry's birthday. 38 today.
Yes, I'd actually forgotten that until I saw it announced in the paper today.
Gosh, he must be having a miserable one.
Yeah, I'm sure if they were back in California, they'd be having a grand party with their show business friends. But I don't know if they'll celebrate with a quiet meal or something, I guess, between them. I mean, the other royals, you know, are not really around. They've taken a break before the funeral. Prince Charles has gone to rest at Highgrove, and I believe the Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Catherine, have gone to Norfolk.
So it's not like Harry will be seeing any of them?
No, I wouldn't have thought he'll be seeing them at all. Remember that it was their daughter Lilibet's first birthday when they were last here in June,
yes, yeah.
during the Platinum Jubilee. And that was interesting because they did have a party and they invited people, but it turned out that I don't think really any royals turned up. The Queen did see them, but separately, and she made a point of not agreeing to have a photograph Lilibet meets Lilibet, which I think there were some suspicions they might want this photo to use in the future and use as part of their commercial activity. So,
gosh,
you know, I'm sure they'll wish Harry a happy birthday when they next see him.
Kate, we touched the other day on the prospect of any possible reconciliation between Harry and his family, and today Richard Kay raises that subject again, suggesting that it would be very advantageous to Charles to bring him back in, to take some of the workload and to possibly capitalise on Harry's popularity. What's your view?
I think we all hope, don't we, that there'll be this big kind of reunion, particularly between the brothers. And we had a glimpse of it last Saturday. So we were told by Kensington Palace that we were to expect the new Prince and Princess of Wales to do a little walkabout, look at some of the flowers on Saturday afternoon in Windsor. And it's going to be about 4:30. It's later and later and later. And obviously when they did emerge about 5:15, we had not just Kate and William, but the Duke and Duchess of Sussex as well. And that looked like the beginning of something quite amazing, really, that they could all perhaps work together. Here was the Fab Four reunited. I would say from the body language we saw yesterday, that's probably further off than we had hoped. It did look slightly frosty. Having said that, it was a ceremonial, funereal procession, so it's not something that you'd see lots of laughs or smiles at. But like you say, the body language, it did look like there's still some way to go before those brothers can be perhaps what they once were.
And also, what Richard Kay was saying is that possibly some of the commercial deals already set in stone and like a runaway train will put the dampeners on any idea of a reconciliation.
I mean, I would love the idea of sort of just turning back time and going back to what Prince Charles had always wanted of this slimmed down royal family. But I just don't think it's going to happen because, I mean, remember why they moved to America. They wanted privacy, they wanted to get away from the British newspapers. Sure, they wanted to make money. And they will have to give up doing that. They'd have to give up their podcasts, they'd have to give up all the cashing in they've been doing. And I don't think there's a chance that they'd consider that. So I'm afraid I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, let's move on. This week we have been creating a series of galleries of some of our favourite images of the late Queen. Today we bring you Her Majesty on tour. Some historic images there. Now that the Queen is lying in state at Westminster, the attention turns to her funeral on Monday. Believe it or not, it's incredible, isn't it, to be talking this way? But Rebecca, you have just come off a call from Buckingham Palace. Is everything set in place? All plans smooth?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're so you know, they're such a well-oiled machine, the palace, and these have been so rehearsed for many years. But, you know, there have been tweaks along the way, and I'm sure there will be tweaks before Monday. But I think what is going to be so exceptional about Monday is you've got the pomp and the ceremony and the majesty, you know, paying tribute in a fitting way to arguably the greatest monarch this country's ever known. But there is some really personal touches to it as well, and I know Kate will know this and Richard probably as well, but it's really worth emphasising, because I'm not sure always that, you know, our readers and viewers will know this, that after the big event at Westminster Abbey, the Queen is taken by the state hearse to St George's Chapel at Windsor, where there's a second, more intimate ceremony, intimate being 700 people and still cameras, but compared to the 2,000 we're going to see at the Abbey, that's very different. And they're going to be, that's when you'll see, I think, more of the family tributes. You'll see the King laying a standard on his mother's coffin. I suspect that there'll be more tributes there. And then even after that, after the television cameras are turned off, there is a third ceremony. And the Queen is not actually going to be buried in the Royal Vault, which I think a lot of people would assume she would be. Attached to St George's Chapel, there's a King George VI Memorial Chapel, which was built. It's amazing. It's
and
tiny.
Margaret's there.
It's tiny, isn't it? So she's got her mother there, her father, who are buried there, and Princess Margaret's ashes.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
The marble is incredible.
Yeah, and it's really serene and calm, because it doesn't have the kind of the majesty and the history. It's family. And so what will happen afterwards is the royal family will gather there. Prince Philip's coffin will be brought out of the Royal Vault, where it's been there since last April. And him and his wife will be buried with her father, her mother and her sister.
Oh, my goodness.
I know, I actually feel a shiver down my spine saying it. And, of course, King George VI always used to refer to his wife and his children as kind of, you know, we four, us four. And, obviously, it'll be them with her beloved Philip together again for all eternity. I mean, I just think that's beautiful.
Gosh,
really beautiful.
It's so emotional. But, Kate, it's also, you were on this call as well, it's an occasion that most of us will have never seen the like of.
No, I mean, we've got the blueprint, haven't we, from a long time ago. But yeah, this will be remarkable. And I agree with Rebecca. I think that second service in Windsor will be really special, because that's the point at which we'll see some staff, you know, former staff, current staff, who will be invited, who wouldn't have been invited perhaps to the Westminster Abbey, the big service. But it'll be a kind of homecoming, you know, the place that she loved in Windsor. And you have the orb and the sceptre and the crown, and that at the last moment will be taken off the coffin and returned by the crown jeweller to the Tower of London in the most symbolic of ways, that's going back to the state now. You know, the crown has passed to King Charles.
And the breaking of the staff as well.
Yes,
I mean, it's amazing.
There's some incredible tradition that, you know, most of us, you know, living today will never have seen and certainly wouldn't even know about. But
exactly.
that's being revived, but in a kind of modern way. So we'll have, in the Abbey, we'll have the Queen's charities represented. So some of the charity patronages, and there'll be people from diverse faiths. It won't just all be, you know, Anglican Church. So it will be tradition, but bearing in mind, you know, the journey that we've been on the last 70 years as a nation.
It's history, it's pomp, it's ceremony, it's formality, it's all of those things. And Richard, we have world leaders arriving in minibuses.
So they should.
Sorry.
This is, to explain to viewers, this is the complications of getting everyone in to a very sort of confined area. They don't
I hope they're not going Addison Lee, that's all I can say.
They don't have the space for, you know, fleets of limousines to be bringing in these world leaders. So lots of them will have to arrive together. So they will be taking their seats on minibuses. You'll have, you know, a sort of 80-year-old head of state of one country, perhaps sort of Kim Jong-un, you know, next to...
Do we really think it's going to be Kim Jong-un? I did read yesterday that North Korea is invited. Who is it really?
I think...
Yeah, I mean, you have got the likes of the Emperor of Japan.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to... I don't think the world will have ever seen anything like this for a long, long time.
No, I'm not sure.
If ever.
The last time, I mean, there has been special
Maybe
dispensation.
world peace will be brokered on those minibuses when the people are thrown together in force.
There could be.
Very nicely.
Yeah.
There's been special dispensation for the US President Joe Biden that he will be able to arrive in his protected vehicle.
In the Beast.
And that's already caused tensions, apparently, with other countries that want their leaders. But, yeah, I mean, in every country that will be represented, there's a story there, you know, about who's going, who's not going. There are so many stories to tell all around the world.
Are you going, Richard?
Well, it would be nice, but unfortunately I have to be here for the viewers of Palace Confidential.
Oh, well, that's hugely fortunate. But, Rebecca, looking beyond that, once the funeral is done, there'll be a huge transition to make as reality's back and everybody has to step into their new roles and adapt.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what we were talking about just then about the amount of world leaders that want to come to the UK, it shows you the Queen's very unique position on the world stage. She was probably the best diplomat this country will ever have. I mean, she was such a unifying factor, as you say, from every, you know, messages and condolences from President Putin in Russia. I mean, you know, she transcended everything. And so that is a huge loss to our country, and they are big shoes to fill for the King. And I think, I read a piece about him the other day, he knows he can't step into her shoes, he doesn't want to step into her shoes, but hopefully he can bring a sense of, you know, wisdom and accumulated experience. And, you know, it was a big change for his, you know, his son, you know, the new Prince of Wales, you know, who's still trying to protect his family by having to step up and take on other duties. I mean, yesterday he held his first official meeting as Duke of Cornwall, in charge of the Duchy of Cornwall, things he wouldn't have had to do before. So, so for everybody, you know, from the top to the very bottom.
Kate, is it true that there's talk of the new Prince and Princess of Wales being shipped to Australia to lead a bit of a pro-monarchy?
I thought you might ask that, Joe, because you'd be interested in your relatives might be interested in.
You know, the chat is rumbling about where this leaves Australia and its Republican debate.
Oh, well, look, I was on that, was it 2012, I think it was, when they went over with Prince George. I remember writing it about the time about George being the kind of Republican dragon slayer. He was so popular, he was so cute. It was just a little 6-month-old or something.
I mean, one is reminded of Princess Diana derailing the monarchy chat in 1983. So
and the Cambridges as was, the Waleses as are now. You know, they have huge cachet in Australia, and it would be a really good move actually for them to go over, William to give a few speeches about his father the King and prepare people there, because they have the magic touch, especially when it comes to Australia.
That's going to be interesting. But Richard, you know, just as they sort of like upped and moved their life to have a quieter life, doing the school runs with the children, stepping away, how's that going to pan out? Are they going to get busier?
I mean, it hasn't lasted literally no more than the first day of school, and everything has changed forever. But our Australian viewers will be able to tell me, but from what I read, you know, William and Catherine are more popular than Charles and Camilla, so the idea of sending them makes sense. And I don't think the new king will be able to just go on a sort of endless tour. He will have so much to do that it would make sense for them to go, and I'm sure they would help shore up the monarchy, and I think Charles will be using them a lot in that respect. On Friday, 16th of September, Victoria Murphy reminded us what was happening with the royal family.
So the Queen is lying in state in Westminster Hall, obviously thousands of people coming past to see her. Her children are going to hold a final vigil this evening, her 4 children standing at 4 corners of her coffin, just like they did when she was in St Giles Cathedral. And that's sort of a final kind of poignant moment of reflection for the 4 children ahead of the funeral on Monday. This is the one moment that we're going to see Prince Andrew wearing his military uniform. That was announced earlier on this week, that he would be wearing military uniform for one of the occasions, and this is the occasion. A final mark of respect is how it was described. At the time, we knew that the exception was going to be made for him, but not for Prince Harry. So there was a bit of discussion and debate around the inconsistency of that. Neither is working royals, but this exception was being made for Andrew. But now we know that Prince Harry will also wear military uniform at a vigil on Saturday evening, which is a vigil of the 8 grandchildren, and they will, in a similar way, stand around the Queen's coffin.
Victoria Murphy there, and joining me on the panel today is author and historian Dr. Tessa Dunlop and the Daily Mail's diary editor Richard Eden. Of course, welcome to you both. I'm going to start with you, Richard. That bit of a surprise that Victoria touched upon at the end there. This Harry uniform thing is a bit of a saga, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, to be honest, it's made me slightly angry that instead of focusing on the funeral and the Queen and her legacy, we've been talking so much about the uniforms.
Well, we could not focus on it, I guess, but here we are talking about
no, but you have to, because it's been
Yeah.
such a talking point. It really has. You know, the latest development is we heard this through clearly what was, you know, Harry and Meghan's spin doctors, their spokesman last night, that Harry's going to be allowed to wear his old army uniform just for 15 minutes while there's a vigil of the grandchildren next to the coffin on Saturday evening.
Okay,
Now,
so not at the funeral on Monday?
no, so
Right.
there'll be no change. He and Prince Andrew, his uncle, will still be in mourning dress for the actual funeral. But the reason it's such a surprise about the change of heart is because Harry made a point. He actually put out a statement
Well,
saying,
we discussed it.
I will be wearing
Yeah.
mourning dress throughout, and I don't need to wear my uniform. So it's all very odd.
Do you know what would look incredibly kind of bolshy and almost counter-cool? Is if Harry was given permission to wear his uniform and didn't. He's just like, I'm going to stand in front of my granny in my morning suit and pay my respects.
Well, is that not just taking it to a whole other level of childishness? I mean, what is it with these men in their military uniforms, whether they've earned them or not? What is it?
Come on. It's all
No,
about
tell
the
me.
regalia of royalty. It's about rank and hierarchy, the raison d'etre for our medieval and beyond.
It's also a bit of a
institutional
sideshow, isn't it?
monarchy. The whole thing is a sideshow. This is Great Britain's sideshow that's putting us front and centre.
Very expensive sideshow.
But
Yeah.
priceless in terms of
Yeah.
soft power and media attention globally. So, I mean, we could argue that as well, again, detracting from the whole point of mourning the Queen. But I would suggest that she wouldn't, I don't want to speak on behalf of our late Queen, but if you look at what happened during Philip's funeral, which was, right, the lot of you in your mourning suits, stop the debate, let's keep it simple. You know, she was extremely adept at cutting through and knowing where to place the focus and when to shut down a family feud. And our current king doesn't have that level of experience. And of course, it's very different when you're disciplining or managing your brother, your sibling. That's a whole different set of challenges, which of course the Queen didn't have to. Well, she did with Margaret, but didn't in the same way.
So do you agree with Tessa that King Charles has been rather hands-off in this whole sideshow?
Well, I mean, as king, he will have to be decisive. That's
Yeah.
the key thing. And the Queen was, and the funeral of her husband is an example of that. I think you have to take a position and stick to it. So regular viewers of this programme will know that I thought it was right that Harry and Andrew weren't allowed to wear uniforms because they're not working royals, but it was wrong that they made the exception for Prince Andrew at the event we're going to see this evening, where he stands vigil with his siblings. But in the case of Andrew, it was justified, the palace said, because his 3 siblings would also be wearing uniform. But what's strange is that on Saturday evening, of the 8 grandchildren of the Queen, it's only William and Harry that can wear a military uniform.
Well, I remain deeply confused.
So we have a law in this country. Once you leave the military, you can't wear your uniform.
Every day's a school day for this Aussie.
Yeah, so if you want to, you have to get special permission,
Mm.
and that has to come from the top, from the monarch.
But ultimately, in terms of people commenting, and I've done quite a lot of broadcast, and a lot of it's been live, and people do pounce on the Harry narrative. It is of global interest, believe it or not. And I think that the optics will be softened because he's been thrown this bone. I know it doesn't, if you crunch into it, Richard, it doesn't make sense. I know that there are deep royal loyalists who believe Harry's been disloyal and doesn't deserve it. But that's kind of irrelevant when you see the thumping great might of monarchy out there on parade at the moment. You know, this is a little loon, a little red-headed lad far from home, and we're saying, come back into the fold for 15 minutes, my friend. Is that such a bad thing?
Well, certainly it means that he will have those images probably on the front pages on Sunday of him back in his uniform next to Prince William.
Don't you think, frankly, the whole drama gives him a lot more material when he's back home giving another interview?
I don't know if he'll go over the minutiae, but certainly the aesthetic is good. But can we just be honest?
The precedent has been set, but
But can we just be honest? And the Queen, by the way, had a real weakness for men in uniform, as do I. I mean, look at William. He's sort of 10 foot tall out there in his honorific uniform. He's got stature, he's no longer bald. Am I allowed to say he's almost sexy? You know, whereas poor little Harry, you know, in his morning suit, it's a drab affair in comparison. It does give them extra inches, for men who can't wear makeup, they can't dye their hair. You know, I have a degree of sympathy.
Just want to sort of like stick up for all the boldies watching. I think you're marvellous. I think you're handsome just as you are. But I'd like to move. Well, you know, I have to say that for my husband. Let's talk briefly, because King Charles has so many little minutiae family problems like this on his plate, including this whole issue of giving titles to the children of Harry and Meghan. Now, I'm really confused. Are they going to be Prince and Princess, or are they not? Does anyone know?
So, in order to be Prince and Princess, Archie and Lilibet, and to be HRHs, they need letters patent to be issued, a special sort of decree by the monarch.
Oh God, I'm bored already.
And from
sorry, but why is it always so formal?
They don't get it automatically.
Yeah.
It needs to be done.
Yeah.
From what we understand, my colleague Rebecca English was reporting this week that it won't happen till after the funeral, after the period of royal mourning. And certainly what Rebecca thinks is that they will be Prince and Princess, but they won't get HRHs. And that seems to be a real sticking point.
I love all the complications and the politics.
The reason why it's so important is that the Queen issued special letters patent so that Princess Charlotte was an HRH, as well as Prince Louis. And they wouldn't normally have got that. It would have been Prince George and, you know, his heirs.
So where do Beatrice and Eugenie fall in that situation?
Well, this is the interesting conundrum.
That's a fascinating question, because letters patent were issued for them too. They got it.
But,
so Harry and Meghan's point was, why not our children?
But the Wessex children don't have it. Louise and James, Edward's children, and likewise Anne's children, Zara and Peter.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the point that I was trying to make at the very beginning about it's a shame that Harry feels he needs that uniform. Do you know, because it's about a confidence. You know, Zara has this extraordinary confidence.
But also,
she's an Olympian. She's got her own life. She doesn't need all the trappings. She's out there on her own.
But also with the Prince and Princess conversation, I'm confused about whether or not the Sussexes are upset that Archie's been banned allegedly because there were concerns over the colour of his skin, or was it that when they were born they said they were eschewing those titles for a quieter life?
Well, let's be clear here. In the infamous Oprah Winfrey interview, Meghan talked about how she'd heard rumours, I think while she was pregnant with Archie, that he wouldn't get these titles that they were expecting, and that was a real source of grievance, so much that she discussed it on national television. So, you know, while these matters might seem rather arcane or whatever, certainly to Harry and Meghan, they're a big deal.
I think the problem was they just hadn't had the Richard Eden lecture on actually what these titles mean.
I know.
And had Meghan been enlightened by Richard, all this Oprah hoo-ha would have blown over. Just interestingly, on the HRH thing, of course, late Princess Diana retained her princess title, but had to give back her HRH title in the wake of the divorce. Do you remember?
Yes.
Yeah.
So actually, HRH is something you earn and can be got rid of, but princess or prince, it doesn't really matter what you do. Please note that Andrew is still a prince. That may catch in the throats of some.
But quite a quote to be taken out of context there. What a prince! What a prince! Let's move on, Richard.
And a prince in uniform.
Oh,
this weekend.
Stop it.
Vice
Your
Admiral.
uniforms, calm down. Richard, there's more stories in the paper today about Anne and Sophie Wessex, and who seem to be destined to take on at least some of the Queen's patronages.
Yeah, these were stories that really cheered me, particularly the one that was speculating that Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, is going to be given, well, inherit a lot of the patronages, charity patronages from the Queen. I mean, there are so many available at the moment, because the ones from Prince Philip largely haven't been distributed either. So she would deserve it. I think she'd be fantastic. And the more roles she's given, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Anyway, in our final montage dedicated to the Queen's life this week, today we've gathered some striking pictures of Her Majesty in her role as head of the armed forces. Okay, so after seeing those pictures, I don't want to start the military argument again, but it will play an important part, the military, in Monday's proceedings.
Of course, you know, our monarch is head of the armed forces, and has always been a crucial thing, and that plays into the argument we were having about military uniforms.
Yeah.
And we will see an amazing display of pageantry on Monday, I'm sure, and they've been busy rehearsing through the night, and it really is going to be a spectacle.
But of course, it will be a more modern state funeral than we've probably seen before.
Yeah, what's really interesting about this is everyone goes, oh, this is historic, you know, we do this better than anyone else in the world. And their sort of platitudes almost become meaningless. First of all, we don't actually do this sort of thing any better than anyone else in the world. The difference is we do it apolitically. Look at the extraordinary Russian displays of might every May. Look at North Korea and the staging of their military spectacles. But we do it through an institution that has no political power. And the history of it, if I can just give you a 1-second lecture on it, is that at the turn of the 20th century, you've got the Kaiser and the German Empire, you've got Russia and the Tsars, you've got Britain, you've got the refronting of Buck Powell, you've got the erection of the Victoria statue, and you've got us putting on these spectacular Jubilee displays in the latter period of Victoria's reign, and then on into Edward VII's reign. And it's about muscling up against a crowded European scene. What happens? The Kaiser, the Tsar, they overplay their hand. They have power. They get it wrong. They lose the war. They die. They collapse. Those dynasties don't survive. Ours does. And what happens is that the British royal family trade their power for popularity, and they brand that popularity in this pomp and pageantry, and it's really, really worked in the era of mass media. It's like a kind of perfect storm. All the family have to do is hold it together on the inside.
Oh. Easy, yeah.
A cinch.
Oh, my gosh. Speaking of the wider family, the new Prince and Princess of Wales, Richard, they're back on the front pages today, and it seems that their part is really in connecting emotively with mourners.
They are, and we really saw that at Sandringham yesterday, where they went up to see all the flowers and the messages that have been left. And obviously, when he was, William did very well talking to members of the public, and he spoke about what a big deal it had been with him alongside Harry, you know, following the Queen's coffin, and all the memories that had brought back from when he was 15 years old, and he did the same thing at Diana's funeral. So I think everyone understood that, and he was just talking about that experience that's dominated his life in many ways.
I think he's a dear old stick, isn't he, William, really? And
he's not that old.
No, I know, but he seems quite sort of woodsy and old. But he seems quite old for his years. I think both of them do. I mean, they've got a lot on their shoulders, don't they? But what's fascinating is he does have that sort of softness of Diana. The way I heard him, you know, chat to a woman, she was showing him a little baby, and I think the baby was in a Paddington costume, and William just said this really sweet one line, I don't know, I think Paddington Bear's overtaken the corgis. It was just deeply touching, and it really reminded me of his mother, actually. They do, both those boys have a certain charismatic empathy that had otherwise, I think, been a little bit lacking.
Yeah, do you think,
among the royals.
What kind of an heir to the throne do you think he will be in the years to come? I
think you'll see him be increasingly supportive and protective of his father. I think that's the one thing this week that we've all kind of pushed to the side. Oh, poor Charles, he's tired. Poor Charles is properly old. I mean, when I look at my own mother, she couldn't be carrying the head of state role, and I always thought she was quite good for her age. It reminds me of Queen Victoria's son, Bertie. He became king aged 59. Obviously 59 then was much older than it is now. And he said, I would have liked it 20 years ago. And I think for Charles, this is a huge amount to take on, aged nearly 74. And physically, the gruelling schedule.
Yes,
today is in Wales.
King Charles is younger than the leader of the free world, Joe Biden.
Yeah, but Biden is like a racehorse. He's never got off the track. He's in the political system. He's a campaigning man. He's been out there champing at the bit. Charles has had this much more challenging, deferential role in the shadow of his mother. I don't think you can compare the two. One is a way of life, and the other is a birthright. A birthright he's been waiting for 74 years.
Amazing. That was a week that shook the world. A reminder that if you don't already, please like and subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals for more fascinating royal videos. We'll see you again soon on Palace Confidential. Goodbye.